This is Sid from Inceptone, and you're listening to The Economic Story. In today's episode, we're going to talk about one of the most important data points that seems to be impacting markets and the economic outlook: inflation. In the last couple of weeks, we have received a number of important data points related to inflation for the US economy. First, it was PCE for February, and then CPI for March, and then PPI for March. CPI came out yesterday, PPI was today, and PCE was end of March, basically. So these data points are very important. First of all, CPI indicates what exactly the customer is or the consumer is experiencing in terms of inflation. What is PPI? PPI is indicating what the producer is experiencing in terms of inflation. And then PCE is basically a customized format of inflation gauge, which is derived out of PPI and CPI, but represents a better way of looking at inflation from the consideration of certain dynamic changes that consumers and producers tend to make when they start experiencing inflation. While CPI and PPI tends to be a little bit more of a static measure of inflation. Okay, so let's look at what exactly were we expecting, what we saw, and how they are trending. With regards to inflation reads versus expectations, the PCE came in roughly close to expectation, while the revisions for January came in a little bit higher. Overall, the good thing is that PCE is the preferred gauge of inflation for the Federal Reserve, which means they tend to be a little bit more at ease in terms of considering the situation of inflation spiking up. But those numbers are for February, not for March, which means we need to take a look at it by end of this March, around end of the month when we get the new numbers. So, what exactly did we see with regards to CPI? CPI came in above expectations. That was yesterday. And yesterday when those numbers hit, the markets went down. It was not a good day for the markets in general. A lot of stocks went down. Yields were moving up all through the day. Not a good day in general, looking at CPI. The reason? Because if inflation goes up again, it spikes up again, it may mean that the Fed does not cut rates anytime soon. It may bring a scenario in wherein the Fed actually decides to raise. Though a lot of people are now talking about, nobody believes that another hike is on the cards, but at least the scenario of a rate cut being delayed is a potential scenario there. Looking at now PPI. So PPI came in today morning. What exactly happened? It was below expectation. And based off of that, the market basically took a sigh of relief and it started to go up. It went up quite a bit actually. And especially a number of areas, including some of the tech stocks. So those are basically about just waiting to go up with the hope of like PPI coming in cooler than expectation. So that's compared to expectation. Okay, so we talked about expectations. What exactly do we see from the trend perspective? Again, this is going to be a view, let's say my opinion based off of what I'm observing. But in general, the commentary around the markets have been similar as well. So on one side, it appears as though the headline for PCE as well as CPI is appearing to be bottoming, while the core for both are appearing to be trending down. A good thing is that, in general, because of the amount of variance that we tend to see with regards to energy and food, which is not part of the core, the trending down aspect of the core is a good thing, which means that inflation is not yet appearing to spike up or spike up too much with regards to those two parameters, or those two gauges. With regards to PPI, the core appears to have bottomed, as well as the headline. That's not necessarily good, but the good news within that is that it's bottoming at a lower level. It is bottoming roughly around the 2 level. So it might still come up though. So which is the part that is not good. But so overarching, it's still not a scary scenario with regards to inflation, but everybody is now watching, is there going to be a spike back in inflation? Okay, so having said that, let's look at what exactly it is. So I'm going to give 3 points. I'm not going to elaborate like too much into it, but I'll put it onto 3 important points that I believe in from my perspective in terms of what exactly it means. First of all, a spiking of inflation appears to be slower than expected. There is an aspect of respiking. There's no assumption about it. We are seeing a very small amount of respiking that could happen, especially when things are not going really bad and things have been trending down for quite a period of time. So not a super surprising thing, but what is good is that there has been an expectation of respiking, but that expectation or the actuals have been lower than expectation. That is positive for sure. Number 2 is consumers who are smart enough to do substitutions. Seems like they're feeling lesser impact of inflation. That is from the fact that PCE have been below CPI. What that means is those consumers who have been dynamic in terms of their spending habits have been doing better in terms of shielding themselves from the heat of inflation, just to use that word, as compared to those who have not changed their spending habits. That's number 2. Number 3 is businesses are experiencing lesser inflation as compared to consumers. That comes from the fact that PPI has been much lower as compared to your CPI and even PCE in general, which means businesses have been able to shield themselves better. And I'm not necessarily talking about those businesses working in the raw material sector or the commodities. These are producer businesses. So they have been able to do better, which is in general, again, good from a market point of view. Right? So that's about it in terms of what exactly it means based off of the read versus expectation and the trend for inflation. Finally, none of whatever I said matters unless we get a grasp at what exactly does happen to markets based off of these trend observations, predictions, etc. So in regards to trends and expectations and what it means, the impact comes from the rate cut scenario. So again, I'll just go point by point. First of all, Fed appears to be holding at the moment, and it basically is holding reluctantly because overall things seem to be working out better, but it is worried about a respike in inflation. So it's in a position where it actually wants to do a bit of cutting, but it needs an excuse to get that started. And at the moment, it has not got that excuse yet. Every single month since January, things have been working out a little bit harder than expectation in general, though not too much, but not enough to give that first excuse for the first cut. That's number 1. Number 2 is ECB is likely to cut first. That is something that came out in fact of President Lagarde's comments as well, which does indicate one other thing. So, and it's an obvious thing, but it's out there, which is Eurozone is doing worse off as compared to US. That is not the only case. The case in general is US has been an exception in terms of how good it's been doing with regards to employment, the growth scenario. Rest of the world, including, I would say even including Canada and Australia, have not done as well. And thus, the only reason they're kind of holding at this moment is because they want the Fed to get to a point where it's ready to cut. Right. So today's economies are very closely integrated. So they coordinate a lot of these things between the central banks. It's not like the days of the past. Next one is slowdown risks are higher outside the US, which is something I did mention. So that is though a bit of a positive for the US dollar, at least in the medium term. There are other issues with USD in the long term. We'll get to that shortly. Commodities have been holding for quite some time, which by that I mean for about 2 years time frame right now. A lot of commodities have been coming down. A lot of commodities have been basically kind of flatlining. I'm not talking about coffee and cocoa, but that is slowly starting to change. I think they're basically running out of patience at this point in time, because at this point in time, what that means is inflation has mostly shifted over to the services side. So a bit of a different scenario as compared to 2023, when a lot of the inflation that we had in the system was taken out of those products. So that's about the commodities aspect. The other aspect is gold has been rallying, and so that's within the commodities complex. What that does mean, and it's a very interesting read, and you should be listening to a lot of economists and market observers talking about this one. It's a long-term macro implication thing that everybody needs to watch out for. Gold appears to be taking up the role of the reserve currency slowly but surely. It is appearing to take that up because a lot of international central banks are starting to basically acquire gold. And I wouldn't go into the details about exactly how it happened. It has to do something with this Russia-Ukraine situation. But it has, if that trend continues, it will have long-term implications, ramifications, however you might want to put in, for US as well as the Western developed economies. Something to be noted here, and also for geopolitics. And then finally, with all of this situation, there is an asterisk that we need to put for against geopolitics, which continues to be a concern. It is amazing as to how many issues have come up and how resilient our markets have been in terms of dealing with these issues. Point is that the trend is not in a good direction, and we need to be monitoring that. So anyways, that's about it from my end. These are obviously kind of my observations and ideas based off of what I have seen. But thanks for listening to me. This is Sid, Economic Story. Thank you so much. Have a good one.